The Secret of the Indian by Lynne Reid Banks, Chapter 13. Mr. Johnson Smells a Rat. Next day was Monday. School. Omri got up very early after a restless night. Little Bear didn't have to wake him for once. The first thing he did was open the chest. Patrick was exactly as before, chill-fleshed but breathing shallowly. Omri crouched on his heels, staring at him. He knew what he should do, what he must do, really. Anyway, he was dying to hear what had been happening in Texas, if indeed that was where Patrick had wound up. It was just that Omri didn't want to interrupt a great adventure, if there was one going on. Nevertheless, he closed the lid and put his hand on the key with the red satin ribbon. "Young man, I need some assistance." It was Matron in her most commanding mood. "Could it wait, Matron?" "No! Some of these men are so much better they can go back where they belong. They're just taking up beds, not to mention my time. Come along, I've marshalled them outside, that cupboard of yours. Now, get them on their way." Omri stood up. The Indians, about 9 of them, many with bandaged limbs or heads, one on crutches made of matchsticks, stood near the door of the cupboard. Little Bear and Bright Stars were with them. "Is it okay if they go back, Little Bear?" "Good to go back. In village much need do. Each brave have work, enough for many." "Do you want to go with them?" asked Omri with a heavy heart. Little Bear looked up at him. "I think much of go back or stay. I wish this and this, so I choose. You send Little Bear back now. When sun go, you bring here again. I see village, then come back, see hurt braves." "Great idea. You can almost be in 2 places at once. Will you take Bright Stars with you?" "Yes, take wife, take son. Omri bring Little Bear back when sun go." Omri felt a bit confused about the logistics of all this, but he nodded, and he and Little Bear touched hands. He opened the cupboard with some help from Matron. And each other, the Indians scrambled over the bottom rim. Little Bear helped Bright Stars in. She cast a tender look back at Omri and waved to him. Omri then borrowed the key from the chest and dispatched them. Why did he feel sad about this parting, that was only to be for one day? He took the plastic figures from the cupboard and put them safely in his pocket. Matron gave a sigh of satisfaction. "We are not going to lose any more now," she said. "The others are all on the mend." "What did the team think of it all?" Matron permitted herself a smirk. "Well, as the bard says, conscience does make cowards of us all. I think each of them thought he'd probably had too much to drink, and none of them liked to admit it to the others. So they just got on with the job as per my orders, suggestions. I suppose you were up all night after we sent them back." "Let's say I didn't get a lot of sleep. Never mind, only a night's work." "You're wonderful," said Omri sincerely. "Pish, tush, and likewise pooh," said Matron, dismissing the compliment. But he had seen a blush of pleasure spread over those craggy features. "What about a cuppa? Can't start the day without my tea." "And I can't start mine without my coffee," chimed in Boone's voice. Omri had fixed him up with a little house made of Lego and put it out of sight behind the cupboard, so Boone could get a good night's sleep away from the seed tray with all the hospital-like hustle and bustle. Now Omri lifted the roof off. Boone was sitting bolt upright in bed, looking ready for anything. "I'm more'n a mite hungry, too. So I've been depraved of my liquor, don't you go forgetting some powerful victuals." Omri had had trouble with him the night before when he had returned without any whiskey. He hurried down to the kitchen and fetched as many powerful victuals as he could readily lay hands on, while boiling the kettle for tea and coffee. He wished Emma were here. He felt beleaguered, having to do everything himself. He wasn't sure he'd got his principles right, seeing that everyone was fed before he did anything about Patrick. As he tiptoed back upstairs, he thought he'd see to that as soon as he was dressed. But hardly was he back in his room than he was alarmed to hear footsteps rattling up the attic stairs. "Hey, Omri, wake up! You're on the news!" It was Guion, banging on the door. Omri hastily heaped some junk on top of the chest and opened the bedroom door a crack. "What are you going on about?" "It's on my clock radio, Radio London. They've just announced the winners of the story competition." Omri was speechless. He'd forgotten about winning the prize. "I wish I'd heard it," he'd said at last. "Too bad it's over now," said Guion, thumping down the stairs again in his pajamas. After that, there just wasn't a minute's rest, a minute's peace. His parents had both heard the announcement and were clamoring for Omri to come down for a special bacon and eggs breakfast to celebrate. By the time that was done with, it was too late to go back upstairs because his train wouldn't wait for him. Luckily, he'd given the food to Matron to distribute, reserving a special, large, so to speak, portion for Boone in his little house. Omri just had to go off and leave Patrick wherever he was. There were no skinheads to make trouble in Hobble Road, and Omri got to school in good order, though feeling highly uneasy. He was dead worried about Patrick. What would Patrick's mother say when he didn't show up? And what if he was in some appalling danger, as Omri himself had been in the Indian village, and was waiting on tenterhooks to be brought back? Omri put his books and stuff in his locker, and then went into assembly. Mr. Johnson, the headmaster, was already on the stage, clearing his throat for silence. More than the usual number of teachers were there, too. Several hundred children were seated on the floor. Omri crept in and sat down near the main doors. He craned his neck, looking for Emma, but he couldn't see her. Hadn't she come to school? He was looking for her anxiously when Mr. Johnson began to talk. Omri didn't take in what he said until suddenly, with a shock, he heard his own name. Everywhere in the auditorium, people turned their heads to look at him. Omri sat up straight, alarmed. "Very proud indeed," Mr. Johnson concluded. "Omri, stand up and come forward." Utterly bewildered, Omri rose to his feet. "Me?" "Yes, yes," beamed Mr. Johnson. All the teachers on the stage were smiling, and as Omri moved forward, everyone started to applaud. Omri found himself being helped onto the stage, and turning, he saw he was the focus of hundreds of pairs of eyes. What was all this? If only he'd been listening. "Now it just so happens," said Mr. Johnson, in an unfamiliarly genial tones, "that I have here a copy of Omri's story, which had to be kept by the school when Omri entered it for the competition, and what I would be really nice is if Omri would agree to read us his winning story as this morning's assembly feature." Omri's mouth fell open. Mr. Johnson had handed him a typed manuscript, which he well recognized. He typed it himself, Hunt and Peck system, in 3 copies. He'd sent one into telecom for the writing competition, one he'd kept, and this one he'd had to hand into the school office. Across the top was typed the title, "The Plastic Indian." He clutched it till it creased, swallowed hard, and looked up at Mr. Johnson imploringly. "Now, Omri, no false modesty. Telecom has notified the school that you have won first prize in the intermediate age group, £300. And what about that, you people?" And there was an impressed and envious gasp from the assembled crowd below, and Omri heard murmurs of £300. Wow, get old Omri then. Millionaire time, blimey. And they burst into applause all over again. "Stand here in the middle of the stage," Mr. Johnson said, maneuvering Omri by the shoulders. "Now then, I haven't had a chance to read it myself yet, so I'm just going to sit here and enjoy it. Well done, Omri. Off you go." Omri dithered a moment or two, and then thought, "Hey, this isn't half bad. I've dreamed of this happening," so he began to read. The story was based on his first meeting with the Indian a year ago, when he'd first discovered the cupboard and the key's magic. It was a great story, and he'd done his best to write it well. At first, when he began to read it, he was nervous and stumbled over the words, but after a paragraph or two, he hit his stride and began to read with feeling and expression. He did Little Bear's gruff voice and had a stab at Boone's Texas accent. When he said something funny, the whole auditorium erupted with laughter. During the exciting bits, everyone sat poised to catch what came next. It was very satisfying, and when he finished the story and the applause broke out again with some cheering, Omri felt this was a great moment in his life, one that he'd always remember. In fact, he was feeling extremely pleased with himself, not at all a sensation he was accustomed to at school, when he suddenly became aware that Mr. Johnson had stood up behind him and was looming over him in a distinctly sinister manner. Before the applause had died away, Mr. Johnson bent down and whispered something in Omri's ear that made his blood chill in his veins. "I want to see you in my office immediately." Omri turned to look at him. He was appalled to see that all geniality had been wiped from the headmaster's face, which had gone the color of a wet sheet.